So we all know by the numbers, Dems seem to be more inclined to vote by mail than Republicans. But Axios is reporting, Sagar, that some Democrats are now pivoting back to encouraging voters to vote in person. Team Rising probably knows why.
All right, so back with us, Democratic strategist and Senior VP of Issues Management with MWWPR Public Affairs, Jennifer Holdsworth, and Senior Policy Analyst with the Independent Women's Forum, Inez Stetman. Two great friends of the show. It's good to see you guys.
Great to see you, ladies.
Be here.
So, Jen, let's start with you. I think this is pretty interesting. There was a huge mail-in balloting push by a lot of Democratic officials for months and months and months. Now, this is according to the Axios story, a lot of Democrats are saying, hey, you know what? Just because in order to avoid chaos on Election Day and more, I think we should vote in person so we can get those results immediately. Where do you fall on the matter? Because we are in the middle of a pandemic, but knowing on Election Day would also be nice.
I'm completely in support, unfortunately, of early in-person voting. I would love to sit here and say that mail-in voting is a foolproof way to get it done for two reasons. Number one, I was recently staffing an election that went completely awry with mail-in ballots, and that was in New York, which was a blue state, and New York City, a blue city. So you would think it would have been able to been run very smoothly, but it wasn't. It was a disaster of epic proportions. And number two, you have a president who is already sowing doubt among his base about what the vote is going to be on Election Day with regard to mail-in ballots. So I think that we need to have an overwhelming win against President Trump to not get into a constitutional crisis. So I'm really, really leaning on folks to vote early, wear a mask, socially distance, or to show up on Election Day. I have a feeling lines are going to be very, very long, so it's going to be interesting.
And as what is your reaction to this report? And just in general, what is your expectation for how Election Day is going to go? Are you in the camp of sort of the doomsday scenarios? We've been laying out some of those here. But then, there's a piece in the Wall Street Journal that's actually, we're going to pretty much know on Election Day and it's all going to be okay.
Well, two things. One, to the idea of mass mail-in itself. I mean, it's going to be a disaster, especially because a lot of states do not clean up their voter rolls. So, for example, California has really atrocious, voter rolls. They're just mailing out all of those ballots. I mean, it's going to be a disaster. Some states can handle it because they have been doing it for longer, like Colorado, and they tend to clean up their voter rolls accordingly, even though there it's an issue too. But I think just from a pure election security standpoint, this is going to be a complete disaster. And couple that with the fact that Americans don't trust their institutions on both sides. This is by no means exclusive to the right? Both sides of this country, and with very good reason, don't trust the media. They don't trust their governments. They don't trust a lot of the institutional sort of pillars around this. And I think it is very dangerous. I think it's a very dangerous situation because this country is a very different country than it was in the year 2000 when hanging chads kicked the election to the Supreme Court. The institutional trust has eroded, so much in the last 20 years that we are very likely looking at a scenario where one side or the other does not accept the election result or see it as legitimate. That's banana republic territory. That is a constitutional crisis, and it is a huge problem.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Inez. And actually, Jen, just to push you a little bit on this, which is there are actually more Biden supporters who say that they won't accept the results of the election than Trump supporters in the most recent polling that we see. So where do you think that, when Hillary Clinton comes out and says that Biden should not accept the results of the election under any circumstances, that is responsible, leading to results that we see in the polls right now?
Yeah, I think she said that he shouldn't concede. So I think this was qualified. I think what they're talking about is, look, now we're headed into unknown territory with the Supreme Court. If this election winds up in the courts, that's where I think you're going to see a lot of trust recede on the Democratic side. So no question that Democrats are already looking very, very, very strongly into possible hacking into the vote that Republicans in Congress don't seem to be concerned with. But short of that, I think we're talking about the federal court system. That could prove to be really problematic if this winds up there, which is why I think you're seeing more and more Democrats say, hey, we've got to make sure that this is an overwhelming in-person vote so that there is no question and we can trust the results on both sides. It's going to be difficult.
And as on the flip side, you do have some Republican leaders coming out and saying basically, Trump's railing against mail-in balloting is undermining the potential GOP vote because you are in the middle of a pandemic and the safest way to vote would be to send in mail-in ballots. Do you think that that's a political risk for them, that they've basically depressed turnout for their own people in terms of mail-in balloting?
Oh, I mean, who the heck knows? I mean, this is uncharted territory. I will say that for the most part, Republicans have made a distinction between absentee balloting and mass mail-in balloting. So the latter is what I'm much more concerned about. Absentee ballots have been around. In most states, you can request an absentee ballot for lots of reasons, and I suspect they're going to be including the pandemic as among those reasons where you can request an absentee ballot. But there is a huge difference between somebody at a verified address, requesting a mail-in ballot that is sent to them, and then just mailing out millions of ballots to addresses that, look, I suspect the one political act I've ever done was I once did the door knocking, right? For some local Republican candidate all the way back in college. And even those universes of voter rolls were completely crazy. They had people who had been dead for 15 years on them. People move away. And that kind of mailing ballots to those crazy addresses in such a charged political environment, I think is a disaster. I think Republicans are right to say that in advance that it is a disaster. But yeah, as I said before, I think we are treading in dangerous territory, even if there might be good reasons to suspect that this election will not be conducted with the high standards of integrity that Americans, have come to expect in their elections. We're still treading in dangerous territory because then what, right? Then what? So there aren't any good answers to that question.
No. Who the hell knows, I think, is the best response so far. All right, guys.
Thanks, ladies. Enjoy your weekends.
Thank you. You too.
Next on Rising, we're going to talk about the Dems' fight or lack thereof on the SCOTUS nominee when Rising continues.